Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. I'm also curious, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now settle in, get comfortable, let the world slow down. Elena Moore was born on September 12, 1989, in the coastal city of Fairhaven, Australia. To everyone who knew her growing up, Elena was light itself. She laughed easily, spoke quickly, and had a habit of throwing her whole heart into whatever she loved. As a child, she used to tell her parents that she wanted a house full of kids one day, that she wanted noise and chaos and warmth. She was the kind of girl who mothered her dolls seriously and looked after her younger brother as if it were a job she took pride in. At school, Elena thrived. She captained her senior class, represented her state in competitive trampoline gymnastics, and worked part-time coaching younger kids. Teachers described her as dependable, empathetic, and quietly strong. She didn't crave attention, but people noticed her anyway. When she graduated, she began working with youth programs at a local community sports center, teaching gymnastics and supervising children during school holiday programs. It was work she loved. Helping kids grow confident in their bodies and themselves felt natural to her. That was where she met Marcus Reed. Marcus was older, 13 years older to be exact. He had recently relocated from New Zealand and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who liked being perceived as accomplished. He spoke often about his past as a professional rugby player, though his career had ended before it truly began. Still, he leaned on that identity heavily. It shaped how he wanted others to see him: disciplined, dominant, impressive. Marcus had a history, though it wasn't one he shared openly. His upbringing had been unstable. His father had spent time in prison, and family members later described Marcus as a volatile child who struggled with anger and control. Some relatives quietly admitted they were afraid of him. Others excused his behavior as the product of a difficult childhood. When Marcus's young son enrolled in a gymnastics class Elena taught, their paths crossed. He was charming at first, attentive, complimenting her dedication to children, her work ethic, her kindness. He told her his marriage was effectively over, that he and his wife were separated but living under the same roof for the sake of their child. Elena believed him. The affair began quietly, then quickly consumed everything. Within months, Marcus left his wife and moved out. But even then, his behavior toward his ex-partner remained aggressive. He showed up unannounced. He threatened her when she disagreed with him about parenting. Elena noticed the warning signs, but she was young, emotionally invested, and believed that love meant patience. 6 months into the relationship, Elena became pregnant. She wanted to keep the baby. Marcus did not. He told her she was too young, that a child would ruin her future. Eventually, worn down by his certainty and pressure, she agreed to terminate the pregnancy. It would be the first of many times she learned that saying no to Marcus came at a cost. Over the next several years, they moved frequently before settling in a quiet suburb. They married while Elena was pregnant again, and soon welcomed their first child, a gentle, observant middle daughter named Maeve, and a boisterous little boy named Noah, who adored his mother with complete devotion. From the outside, they looked like a fitness-focused, ambitious family. They opened a gym together. Elena's parents invested heavily to help them get started, but the business struggled, and financial pressure mounted. Quietly, Elena's parents stepped in again and again to help cover rent, bills, and groceries. As the years passed, Marcus's need for control intensified. It started subtly, comments about what Elena wore. He didn't like shorts, didn't like skirts, didn't like certain colors. In a hot Australian climate, her wardrobe became noticeably restrictive. Then came the shared social media account. Marcus insisted it was better that way, transparent, healthy. He began working at the same gym Elena did, explaining it as convenience. Others saw it as surveillance. He isolated her from her family slowly, methodically. He criticized them constantly, limited visits, controlled how long the children could stay. If the kids didn't behave perfectly, he punished them by throwing away toys or canceling outings they had been excited about. When Elena objected, he turned his anger on her. Friends began noticing bruises, finger-shaped marks. Elena brushed them off. She always had an explanation. Marcus monitored her communications obsessively. On more than one occasion, he referenced private conversations Elena had supposedly had without him present. He claimed accidents, open lines, misunderstandings. Elena wasn't convinced. She began to suspect she was being listened to. Physical intimidation escalated. Phones smashed, personal belongings destroyed during arguments. Marcus demanded intimacy daily and treated refusal as betrayal. Elena later said compliance became a survival tactic, something she endured to keep the peace and protect the children. One night, after an argument, Marcus left the house with a hose. Elena panicked. She remembered what he had once threatened his ex-wife with years earlier. Fearing the worst, she called her parents, who drove the city searching for him. He returned hours later, claiming he had nearly ended his life. Elena believed him. She stayed. But fear lingered. By late 2019, Elena knew she had to leave. She contacted a family violence support service in secret, terrified Marcus was tracking her movements. Together, they created a plan. In early December, she executed it. She picked the eldest from school, left most of her belongings behind, and fled to a friend's house. She left her phone hidden, just in case. The next day, she and the children went to her parents' home. Marcus unraveled. He contacted relationship services, but never followed through. He told doctors he regretted his behavior. He cried. He spoke about anxiety and stress. He admitted to control issues, but framed himself as a man who had been pushed too far. No formal risk assessments were completed. He was prescribed medication for sleep and sent on his way. Elena went to police. She was advised to apply for a protection order. She hesitated, fearing escalation. Marcus continued contacting her, weaponizing the children. He told her she was harming them. He told her parents she was mentally unstable. He withheld the kids, then promised to return them, then changed his mind. Each time, Elena panicked. Eventually, police intervened and issued a temporary protection order on her behalf. Marcus contested it. He attended counseling sessions, presenting himself as calm, cooperative, misunderstood. He denied being a danger. Professionals took him at his word. Letters were written in his support. Meanwhile, Elena lived in constant fear, watching him appear in the same cafes, the same shopping centers, the same streets. She told friends she was afraid he would hurt the children to hurt her. She was right, and she didn't know how little time she had left. By January, Elena Moore's life had narrowed into something small and fragile. Every decision she made was filtered through fear. Fear of being followed. Fear of saying the wrong thing in court. Fear that Marcus Reed would do exactly what she had begun to suspect he was capable of doing. The protection order was supposed to create distance. On paper, it looked reassuring. Marcus was barred from contacting Elena directly, barred from coming near her parents' home, barred from intimidating or harassing her. In reality, it did very little to ease her anxiety. Marcus knew where the children went to school. He knew Elena's routines. He knew how to appear compliant while quietly pushing boundaries. What frightened Elena most was not his anger, it was his calm. During mediation meetings and court-related appointments, Marcus was controlled, polite, even soft-spoken. He spoke about reconciliation, about therapy, about wanting to co-parent peacefully. Professionals noted his cooperation. Some described him as remorseful. Others wrote that he seemed distressed but not dangerous. Elena sat across from him in those rooms, her body rigid, heart racing. She noticed details no one else did. The way his jaw tightened when she spoke. The way his eyes followed her every movement. The silence that fell when he felt he was losing control of the narrative. At night, she barely slept. She documented everything: missed calls, unexpected sightings, comments the children repeated after returning from visits with their father. Marcus told them things he should never have said, that their mother was trying to take them away, that she was lying, that she didn't love them the way he did. Her eldest, Isla, began having nightmares. Maeve withdrew, becoming quiet and anxious. Little Noah clung to Elena constantly, crying when she left the room. Elena reported her concerns repeatedly. She told police that Marcus had a history of violence, that he had threatened self-harm before, that he had threatened others in the past. She asked if the protection order was enough. She asked what would happen if he broke it. Each time, the response was procedural. If he breached it, she could report it. If there was immediate danger, she should call emergency services. The burden was on her to predict the moment everything would go wrong. Marcus, meanwhile, began constructing a version of events that painted him as the victim. He told friends and family that Elena was mentally unstable, that she had fabricated allegations, that she was manipulating the system to alienate him from his children. Some believed him, others stayed silent. He attended a men's behavior change program briefly, then stopped. He told his counselor he was no longer angry, that he had found peace. No one followed up when he disengaged. Behind the scenes, his resentment deepened. In messages later recovered by investigators, Marcus wrote about injustice, about betrayal, about losing everything he believed was his. He blamed Elena for the collapse of his identity, his business, his family, his control. The court hearing to determine the future of the protection order was approaching. Elena dreaded it. She feared that if the order were lifted or weakened, Marcus would feel vindicated, empowered. Days before the hearing, Marcus was seen driving slowly past Elena's parents' home. He didn't stop. He didn't approach. He just passed by, once, then again. Elena reported it. Nothing came of it. On the morning of February 18th, Elena woke early. The children were restless. Isla complained of a headache. Maeve refused breakfast. Noah was unusually quiet. Elena checked her phone constantly. She had a bad feeling she couldn't shake. She considered keeping the children home, but worried about seeming paranoid. She reminded herself she had done everything she was told to do. She dropped Isla and Maeve at school, hugging them longer than usual. Noah went with her parents to their home. Elena planned to run errands, then return later. That morning, Marcus purchased items from a local hardware store. A receipt later showed rope, gloves, and plastic sheeting. At the time, it raised no alarms. He drove calmly. Witnesses later said nothing about him seemed unusual. Sometime before midday, Marcus arrived at Elena's parents' house. What happened next would later be reconstructed through forensic evidence, phone data, and fragments of truth pieced together after it was far too late. Marcus entered the home when Elena's parents were out. He was not supposed to be there. He waited. When Elena arrived with Noah, she did not have time to react. Investigators believe Marcus attacked her almost immediately. The violence was extreme, purposeful, silencing. He restrained her, ignored her pleas, and focused on control rather than speed. What haunts those who studied the case is not just what Marcus did, but how methodical he was. He did not panic. He did not flee. After killing Elena, he turned his attention to the children. Noah was killed inside the home. His small body later showed signs that he had tried to escape. Isla and Maeve were taken from school under false pretenses. Marcus convinced staff he had authority. He drove them to a separate location. There, he killed them too. Each act was deliberate. Each decision was made in cold defiance of every warning Elena had tried to raise. Marcus then attempted to stage his own death. He drove to a dam, leaving behind items meant to suggest suicide. For days, authorities searched the water, believing he had drowned. Elena's parents returned home that afternoon. What they found would break them forever. The house was silent, too silent. Elena's car was in the driveway. The door was ajar. Inside, there were signs of struggle, blood, broken furniture. The realization hit them before the confirmation did. Police were called. The search began. Panic spread through the community as news broke that 3 children were missing. For 3 days, Marcus remained at large. The narrative the public was given was incomplete. Many still believed Marcus was dead, that this was a tragedy without a perpetrator. But investigators noticed inconsistencies, surveillance footage, phone pings, the absence of a body. On the 4th day, Marcus was found alive, hiding in a rural area. He was arrested without resistance. When questioned, he spoke calmly. He blamed Elena. He blamed the system. He blamed everyone but himself. The weight of what had happened began to settle, and with it came a question that would echo long after the case concluded. How many warnings does it take before someone is believed? When Marcus Reed was finally brought into custody, the shock had already spread far beyond the quiet neighborhoods where Elena Moore and her children once lived. Candlelight vigils appeared overnight, school gates filled with flowers, handwritten notes, and stuffed animals. People who had never met the family felt a grief that was both intimate and unbearable. But grief quickly turned into anger. As the details emerged, the public learned what Elena had done in the weeks before her death, the reports she filed, the protection order she obtained, the warnings she voiced again and again. With each new revelation, a single question hardened into outrage. How was this allowed to happen? The investigation moved swiftly but painfully. Detectives reconstructed Marcus's movements minute by minute. His phone data contradicted his early claims. Surveillance footage placed him at locations he said he never visited. Receipts tied him to purchases that aligned with the timeline of the killings. When confronted with the evidence, Marcus stopped denying what he had done. Instead, he reframed it. In interrogation rooms, he spoke in detached, almost philosophical terms. He described feeling cornered and erased. He claimed Elena had destroyed his life, his identity, his future. At no point did he express genuine remorse for the children. When asked about them directly, he deflected or fell silent. Psychologists later described his mindset as entitlement-driven rage. He believed the world owed him control. When that control was taken away, he chose annihilation over accountability. The charges were extensive: 4 counts of murder, aggravated burglary, kidnapping, violations of the protection order. Prosecutors announced they would seek the maximum possible sentence. Elena's parents sat in the courtroom every day. They listened to evidence they never wanted to hear. They saw photos they would never forget. They endured testimony that described their grandchildren's final moments in clinical language that felt cruel by necessity. Marcus showed little reaction. At times, he even appeared bored. The trial became a national focal point. Legal experts debated the failures that led up to the killings. Advocacy groups highlighted how often victims of coercive control are dismissed because their abusers appear calm and cooperative. News outlets replayed footage of Marcus from earlier hearings, pointing out how easily his composure had fooled professionals trained to assess risk. One moment in particular stood out. A police officer testified that Elena had asked him during one of her final reports, "What happens if he doesn't stop?" The officer had replied, "Then you call us." The courtroom fell silent. The defense attempted to argue diminished responsibility. They cited stress, emotional collapse, and mental health struggles. Prosecutors dismantled those claims methodically. They showed planning, preparation, deliberate choices made over hours, not seconds. This was not a loss of control, it was an assertion of it. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict was guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Elena's mother stood at the podium, her voice shaking but steady. She spoke not of Marcus, but of her daughter, of Elena's laughter, her protectiveness, the way she had fought, even when exhausted, to keep her children safe. You didn't fail them, the system did. The judge sentenced Marcus Reed to multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Marcus stared straight ahead. He did not look at the families. He did not speak. He was led away in silence. But the case did not end there. In the months that followed, an independent review was launched into how Elena's case had been handled. Investigators examined police responses, court decisions, and risk assessments. The findings were deeply unsettling. No single failure caused the tragedy. Instead, it was a series of small dismissals, a missed escalation, an assumption that calm behavior equaled safety, a system designed to respond to violence, not to prevent it. Elena had done what victims are told to do. She documented, she reported, she complied, she trusted. That trust cost her everything. Public pressure led to changes. New protocols were introduced for handling cases involving coercive control and credible threats. Training programs were updated to focus less on visible aggression and more on patterns of behavior. Protection orders were revised to include stronger enforcement mechanisms. These changes came too late for Elena and her children. Their home was eventually sold. The school playground where Isla and Maeve once played was renovated. Life, painfully and unfairly, moved forward, but memory lingered. Every year on the anniversary of their deaths, the community gathers at a small memorial garden near the school. 4 stones bear 4 names. Parents hold their children a little tighter. Teachers remind students to speak up when something feels wrong. Elena's story has been shared in training sessions, courtrooms, and advocacy campaigns, not as a spectacle, but as a warning. A reminder that danger does not always shout. Sometimes it waits patiently, wrapped in politeness and denial. In prison, Marcus is given several interviews. In each one, he reframes himself as misunderstood. He speaks about forgiveness, about faith, about being judged unfairly. He never speaks the children's names. Experts say this is not unusual. For men like Marcus, accountability is incompatible with their self-image. Admitting guilt would mean acknowledging that the control they believed they deserved was never theirs. Meanwhile, Elena's parents have dedicated their lives to advocacy. They speak to lawmakers, law enforcement, and survivors. They tell Elena's story in her own words, using her reports, her messages, her voice. They want people to understand one thing. The signs were there. The tragedy was not unpredictable, it was preventable. And that is the most haunting truth of all. Because somewhere, right now, someone is documenting missed calls, filing reports, trusting that being heard will be enough. Elena Moore's story stands as both a memorial and a warning, a reminder that listening is not the same as acting, that calm does not mean safe, and that believing victims should never come with conditions. Silence ended Elena's life, but remembering her may yet save another. Riverton is the kind of city that rarely makes national headlines. It is the largest city in the southern state of Palmetto Ridge, known for its riverfront streets, historic brick buildings, and the steady pulse of college life that keeps the city young. Founded in the late 1700s, Riverton survived war, fires, and economic collapse, rebuilding itself each time into something stronger. Today, it is home to government offices, growing tech firms, and most notably, North Coast State University, the institution that anchors the city's identity. It was here, in this familiar and seemingly safe place, that the life of a young student named Emily Carter came to a sudden and brutal end. Emily Carter was 21 years old. She was a senior at North Coast State University, just weeks away from graduation, with her entire future unfolding in front of her. She planned to continue her education, having already applied to several graduate law programs. Her dream was clear and unwavering. She wanted to become a civil rights attorney, someone who could stand between power and injustice. Emily was born on September 4, 1997, in a quiet suburb outside Brighton, Massachusetts. She grew up in a close-knit family that valued education, curiosity, and empathy. Her father worked in finance. Her mother taught literature at a local community college. Emily had an older brother who was fiercely protective of her, though he would later admit she rarely needed protecting. From childhood, Emily was energetic and outspoken. She had a habit of speaking her mind, even when it made adults uncomfortable. Teachers described her as sharp and persistent. Friends remembered her as playful and deeply loyal, someone who would stay up all night talking through someone else's problems, even if she had an exam the next morning. After graduating high school with honors, Emily was accepted into North Coast State University, where she majored in political science. College only amplified what had always been there. She thrived in debate, volunteered with legal aid groups, and joined Delta Kappa Phi, a sorority known for its emphasis on leadership and community service. During her junior year, Emily participated in a semester-long study abroad program in Lisbon. It was there, witnessing refugee advocacy efforts and immigration hearings, that her desire to study law solidified. She returned home changed, more focused, more determined. By early 2019, everything in Emily's life seemed to be aligning. She had been accepted into 2 graduate programs. One offered prestige, the other offered financial relief. After long discussions with her family, she chose the latter, relieved that she wouldn't graduate buried in debt. Her boyfriend, Daniel, had already graduated the year before and moved to a neighboring city for work. The distance was inconvenient but manageable. They talked daily, they shared locations on their phones, they made plans for life after graduation. Daniel had already begun applying for jobs closer to where Emily would be attending graduate school. There were no warning signs, no troubled past, no sense of looming danger. On the night of April 3, 2019, Emily went out with friends to Harbor Row, a lively entertainment district less than a mile from campus. The area was packed with bars, food trucks, and late-night crowds. It was a Thursday night, and students were unwinding before the final stretch of the semester. Emily and her friends gathered at a popular spot called Anchor Street Lounge. They talked, laughed, and drank casually. By all accounts, Emily was quieter than usual, distracted by stress about her parents' health back home. Still, nothing seemed wrong. Just after 2 a.m., Emily texted Daniel, "Ordered a ride, be home soon." Minutes later, her phone stopped responding. At first, no one panicked. Phones die, rides get delayed, nights out don't always end neatly. Daniel waited, refreshing his screen, watching Emily's location. Something was wrong. The route on his phone didn't make sense. The car icon moved in the opposite direction from Emily's apartment. He tried calling, straight to voicemail. He sent messages, no response. Then her location sharing shut off entirely. By morning, fear replaced confusion. Emily didn't answer calls. She didn't show up to class. Her roommate found her bed untouched. Her purse was gone. Her keys were missing. By early afternoon, her friends contacted campus police. Within minutes, the case escalated to city authorities. Despite the fact that Emily had been missing for less than 12 hours, police moved quickly. Her disappearance was completely out of character. Officers went to her apartment, interviewed her roommate, and gathered detailed descriptions of her clothing. Her photo was released to local media. The city held its breath. That same afternoon, just after 4:30 p.m., a call came in from a rural county nearly 50 miles southeast of Riverton. Two hikers had discovered a body partially concealed along a narrow roadside, hidden behind dense brush. When deputies arrived, they immediately knew the truth. It was Emily Carter. The scene was unlike anything the responding officers had encountered before. Emily's body showed extensive injuries, small but numerous wounds inflicted with extreme force. The wounds were concentrated on her upper body. The medical examiner later estimated there were over 100 individual puncture wounds. Even more disturbing was the condition of her body. Emily had suffered catastrophic blood loss. The volume recovered at the scene and during examination indicated she had nearly been completely drained of blood. The cause of death was ruled acute hemorrhaging. The process would not have been quick. When the news reached Emily's family, it shattered them. Her parents collapsed in grief. Daniel drove through the night to Riverton, unable to process that the last message he had received from Emily was a promise to be home soon. The university canceled classes. Students gathered outside administrative buildings in silence. Fear spread through the campus like a shockwave. Emily had done nothing reckless, nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. She had simply ordered a ride home. For investigators, time was everything. The pressure was immense. A killer was on the loose, and thousands of students were wondering if they could ever feel safe again. Police focused immediately on the final known moments of Emily's life. Security cameras from Harbor Row showed her standing alone at a pickup point. She appeared calm, unaware. No one was following her. The street was still active with foot traffic. At 2:11 a.m., a dark sedan passed by slowly. Emily stepped toward it, hesitated, then stepped back. The car drove away. 30 seconds later, another vehicle pulled up. This time, Emily approached without hesitation and got in. The car drove off. She never came home. As investigators reviewed footage from surrounding streets, one chilling detail emerged. The second vehicle had been circling Harbor Row for over an hour, stopping repeatedly near ride pickup areas, watching people who were alone. This wasn't random. Someone had been hunting, and now the race to identify that car had begun. By the morning after Emily Carter's body was discovered, Riverton no longer felt like the city it had been just 24 hours earlier. The riverfront cafe stayed quiet, students moved in clusters, parents called their children repeatedly. What had once been a place of routine now carried a constant low-level fear. For the Riverton Police Department, the pressure was immediate and relentless. The mayor demanded answers, the university demanded protection, the public demanded an arrest, and the family demanded justice. Detective Mark Holloway, a 20-year veteran of the department, was assigned lead investigator. Holloway had handled homicides before, but this case was different. The brutality of the killing, the randomness of the victim, and the public visibility of a college student's death made it volatile. The first priority was reconstructing Emily's final hours. Investigators retraced her steps from the moment she left Anchor Street Lounge. Surveillance footage was pulled from every business, streetlight camera, and traffic intersection along Harbor Row. Hundreds of hours of video were reviewed frame by frame. The footage confirmed what witnesses had said. Emily left the bar alone at 2:04 a.m. She stood at a designated ride pickup area, scrolling on her phone. At 2:06 a.m., she texted Daniel. At 2:11 a.m., the first vehicle slowed near her but did not stop. At 2:12 a.m., a second car pulled up. This was the last moment Emily was seen alive. The vehicle was a dark-colored sedan, possibly black or deep blue. The license plate was partially obscured by glare. The driver's face was not visible. The car did not match any active rideshare vehicle logged in the area at that time. That detail changed everything. Emily had requested a ride through a popular app. Records showed that the ride was never completed. It had been canceled less than a minute after acceptance. According to the company's data, the assigned driver never reached the pickup location, which meant the car Emily entered was not the car she ordered. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. Someone had impersonated a rideshare driver, intentionally positioning themselves where students expected safe transportation. As the investigation deepened, Holloway assembled a task force, including state police and federal analysts. They studied patterns. They examined similar crimes nationwide. They searched for any connection between Emily and potential suspects. There were none. Emily had no known enemies, no recent arguments, no history of conflict. Her phone, recovered near the crime scene, revealed nothing unusual. Her messages stopped abruptly after she entered the vehicle. Forensic evidence from the roadside location painted a grim picture. Tire impressions suggested the vehicle had pulled over briefly before speeding away. There were signs of a struggle, but minimal. Emily likely had little time to react. The wounds themselves became a critical focus. The medical examiner's report stunned investigators. The number of stab wounds was excessive, far beyond what was necessary to cause death. The pattern suggested rage, fixation, and repetition. This was not a robbery gone wrong. Nothing was stolen. Emily's wallet remained intact. This was violence for its own sake. Profiler Dr. Elaine Morris, brought in from the State Behavioral Unit, reviewed the findings. Her conclusion was unsettling. This offender did not panic. This was controlled. The volume of wounds indicates compulsion. This individual has rehearsed this in his mind. When asked if this could be a first-time offender, Morris shook her head. Highly unlikely. Investigators began searching for similar unsolved cases. Within days, they found troubling parallels. Over the past 2 years, 3 women in neighboring counties had been found dead under vaguely similar circumstances. Each case had been ruled a separate incident, one classified as a domestic dispute, another as a random assault, the third labeled inconclusive due to lack of evidence. But when files were placed side by side, patterns emerged. All victims were young women, all were alone late at night, all were last seen near transit points, all suffered multiple stab wounds, and in each case, rideshare usage had been documented shortly before disappearance. The cases had never been linked. Now, investigators believe they should have been. Attention shifted to vehicles. State troopers reviewed traffic camera footage from highways leading out of Riverton between 2:15 and 3 a.m. Hundreds of vehicles passed through. Most were eliminated quickly. Then a hit came back. A dark blue Ravencroft LX, registered in a neighboring county, passed through a toll camera at 2:47 a.m. The driver had no clear destination logged. The plate was registered to Thomas Keller, age 32. Keller lived alone in a modest apartment complex outside Riverton. He worked irregular hours as a freelance courier. He had no criminal record beyond a traffic violation. On paper, he was invisible. Detectives obtained a warrant to review Keller's phone records. What they found raised alarms. Keller's phone had pinged cell towers near Harbor Row that night. He had no reason to be there. He lived nearly 40 miles away. He had no friends in the area. When questioned by phone, Keller claimed he had been driving aimlessly, unable to sleep. Investigators also discovered Keller had previously signed up as a rideshare driver but was deactivated months earlier for repeated complaints. Riders reported that he had picked them up without verifying names, deviated from routes, and made them uncomfortable. None of the complaints had risen to criminal level. Until now. A search warrant was executed at Keller's apartment 3 days after Emily's murder. Inside, detectives found nothing immediately obvious. The space was clean, almost too clean. But in the trunk of Keller's car, forensic technicians discovered traces of blood invisible to the naked eye. DNA testing would later confirm it matched Emily Carter. Keller was taken into custody for questioning. During the interrogation, Keller appeared calm, detached. He answered questions politely. He denied knowing Emily. He claimed he had never been to Harbor Row that night. When confronted with phone data, he changed his story. "I drive a lot. I don't remember everywhere I go." When confronted with the blood evidence, Keller fell silent. After 6 hours, he asked for a lawyer. The arrest sent shockwaves through Riverton. Media outlets camped outside the police station. Students demanded transparency. Emily's family waited anxiously for confirmation that the nightmare was ending. But investigators knew the case was far from over. Keller's arrest raised as many questions as it answered. For one thing, the brutality of the crime didn't match a spontaneous act. The evidence suggested planning, familiarity, and escalation. Investigators returned to the earlier cases, now convinced Keller was responsible. But those cases had been misclassified, evidence mishandled, files incomplete. The chain of proof was fragile. Prosecutors warned investigators that without airtight connections, the case could collapse in court. Defense attorneys would argue coincidence, contamination, misinterpretation. The burden now rested on proving that Emily Carter was not an isolated victim, but the final link in a chain that should have been recognized sooner. And somewhere in that failure, justice had been delayed. For Emily and for the others. The arrest of Thomas Keller brought temporary relief to Riverton, but it did not bring closure. For Emily Carter's family, the word suspect was not enough. They wanted certainty, they wanted accountability, and they wanted to understand how a man capable of such violence had gone unnoticed for so long. As prosecutors prepared their case, the investigation shifted from the crime itself to something far more uncomfortable, the system, and had allowed it to continue. Keller was charged with first-degree murder. The evidence tying him to Emily was strong: DNA in the trunk, cell phone location data, rideshare records showing prior access to victims. But when prosecutors attempted to expand charges to include the other suspected victims, the case began to unravel. Those earlier deaths had been buried under misclassification. One woman's murder had been ruled a domestic dispute, despite no evidence of a partner. Another had been labeled a random street assault, even though there was no theft. The third had been quietly closed as undetermined. Different jurisdictions, different detectives, different assumptions. No pattern had been recognized because no one had looked for one. Defense attorneys seized on this immediately. In pretrial hearings, Keller's legal team argued that investigators were retrofitting old cases to strengthen a weak narrative. They claimed confirmation bias. They questioned forensic handling. They attacked the reliability of DNA samples collected years earlier. The court agreed to limit the scope of the trial. Only Emily Carter's murder would be prosecuted. For the families of the other women, it felt like losing their daughters all over again. The trial began 11 months after Emily's death. By then, Riverton had returned to something resembling normalcy, but the courtroom was packed every day. Students lined up outside. Journalists filled the benches. Emily's parents sat together in the front row, holding hands. Keller entered the courtroom expressionless. The prosecution laid out a clear timeline: surveillance footage, phone data, rideshare impersonation, forensic evidence, expert testimony on offender behavior. They painted Keller as a predator who exploited trust, familiarity, and routine. The defense countered with doubt. They questioned the reliability of traffic cameras. They suggested DNA transfer. They argued that Keller's presence near Harbor Row proved nothing. They emphasized the absence of eyewitnesses and the lack of a murder weapon. But the most damaging moment came when Keller's attorney introduced a simple question. "If my client is a serial killer," he asked the jury, "why was he never identified before?" The implication hung in the air. The prosecution's answer was not reassuring. They could not deny the failures. They could only argue that those failures did not change what happened to Emily Carter. After 4 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdict was guilty. Emily's mother sobbed quietly. Her father stared straight ahead. Keller showed no reaction. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the city of Riverton, the verdict was framed as justice served. For law enforcement, it was marked as a win. For the Carter family, it was an ending they never wanted to reach. But for others, the story did not end there. In the months following the trial, an independent review board was convened to examine the earlier cases now believed to be connected. What they found was devastating. Evidence had been lost, notes were incomplete, interviews were never conducted. In one case, a witness statement mentioning a suspicious rideshare pickup had been dismissed as irrelevant. The review concluded that at least 2 of the earlier deaths were likely homicides committed by the same individual. No charges could be filed. Too much time had passed. The findings sparked public outrage. Advocacy groups demanded reforms. Police departments across the state began reevaluating how violent crimes were classified and shared between jurisdictions. A new task force was formed to identify patterns across counties. Rideshare companies implemented stricter driver verification protocols. Universities expanded safety escort programs. These changes came too late for Emily and too late for the others. In prison, Thomas Keller remained silent. He refused interviews. He declined psychological evaluation. He never confessed. He never explained his actions. He never acknowledged his victims. Some investigators believed the silence was intentional, a final act of control. Dr. Elaine Morris, the profiler, later reflected on the case during a training seminar. She said, "This wasn't just about one offender. It was about what happens when systems fail to connect the dots. Violence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in paperwork. Sometimes it survives because no one compares notes." Emily Carter's story became a case study taught to new detectives, not just as an example of predatory behavior, but as a warning about complacency. Her parents established a scholarship in her name. They spoke at universities. They met with legislators. They refused to let her be remembered only for how she died. She was more than a victim, she said in one interview. She was a daughter, a friend, a future that was stolen. Years later, Riverton still remembers the night everything changed. Students still check license plates before getting into cars. Friends still text each other when they arrive home. And somewhere in the quiet hours before dawn, the lessons of Emily's case linger. Because the most frightening part of this story is not that a killer went undetected. It's that he was visible the entire time. Hidden not by darkness, but by assumptions, by misclassified reports, by cases filed and forgotten, and by the belief that tragedies are isolated until they're not.